Assalamu alaikum. Questioner is asking what type of creationists are the most devout, and he specifically mentions Muslims because he believes that the Muslims are the most devout religious people that believe in creationism, which is that Allah created mankind and that we didn't evolve from other species or ancient bacteria and whatnot. So this is the Islamic belief, that we believe Allah molded Adam alayhi salam with clay and then brought life to it. And he mentions that we were created from water, and he created all living things from water. So this is the core belief in Islam. We don't believe that we evolved from chimps or apes or monkeys or anything like that. Just to address, because there's a lot of atheists in this question that are answering, I want to just give them the Islamic point of view and why we reject evolution and why we believe creationism is correct. And I split it up into 5 different points, so you don't have to address every single one if you don't want to watch the whole video. You can just address one single point if you want. And I'll start from number 1 here regarding the basis of evolution, which is that prokaryotes evolved into eukaryotes. So prokaryotic cells are bacterial cells that divide by binary fission, and they can exist outside the human body, whereas the eukaryotic cells are what animate beings are made of. Basically, humans, animals are made out of eukaryotic cells. They divide by mitosis and meiosis. They don't divide by binary fission. So the basis of evolution mentions that a prokaryotic cell, an ancient bacteria, hundreds of millions of years ago, basically the way they mention it is, this is a theory, that oceanic bacteria or oxygenic bacteria produced oxygen on Earth, which led to the creation of oceans, and that this is where that ancient bacteria is split up into other different types of prokaryotic bacteria, and eventually one of them evolved into eukaryotic cell, which created the first life form, and then from that first life form, other life forms evolved, and we have different species from that. So my argument against that is there isn't any evidence that a prokaryotic cell can change into a eukaryotic cell. We know that prokaryotic cells can take in genes and implant them into their DNA through 3 different types of processes: transformation, translation, and conformation or something like that. I can't remember the third one. But they are unable to change their genetics to a eukaryotic cell, which divides by mitosis and meiosis. There's no evidence of that. The counter argument is that it took millions of years to do. My argument towards that is that a lot of prokaryotic cells have been around for millions of years under Hardy-Weinberg conditions. We see them within crystals inside the ocean, and they have not shown any type of evidence to be able to evolve into a eukaryotic cell. And this is a process that can be sped up because these cells replace each other very quickly, right? Further, the evidence that they use to show that a prokaryotic cell became a eukaryotic cell is that they look at the eukaryotic cells and their organelles, such as the mitochondria, and they look at that in chloroplasts, which is in plants and whatnot. They look at that and they say they are similar to bacteria because there's some bacteria that look like these organelles. And this is the main argument for evolution: things looking like each other. Like animals have legs, we have legs. Animals have arms, we have arms, right? Monkeys kind of look like humans, but I can't accept that as evidence because, and I'll get into that point. That would be my point number 3. But going back to I want to finish off this point with prokaryotic and eukaryotic cells. You can't say that we have to wait and observe for millions of years, because there are prokaryotic cells that have been around for that long, as I mentioned, and they haven't shown evidence to evolve into a eukaryotic cell. And even if they did evolve into a eukaryotic cell, that cell cannot be sustained because eukaryotic cells need a living organism to house them and sustain them. So it's a theory. So off the bat, if the basis of evolution can't be proved, and there's too many what ifs, like if this happened, if that happened, if this happened, the evolutionists agree that the whole situation is very unlikely. But if you give a couple billion years, it might happen. It's gonna happen. That's what they say. But like I mentioned, there's ancient bacteria that we've discovered that have been around that long that haven't done that. My point number two is, we have actually we have conducted experiments of evolution. For evolution to occur, there has to be Hardy-Weinberg conditions. No migration, intersex relationships, genetic mutation, etc. There's 5 of them, and we have been testing on fruit flies, which have the lifespan of about a week, if I recall, for about a century plus, under these conditions. And what the experiments have shown us is that these flies, when you interbreed them and force genetic mutations, they grow. The next generation could have longer wings, longer bodies, different shaped eyes. This is the cost of interbreeding, right? You get genetic mutations. But after successive generations, the end result is that they are born without hearts and die. So there's no evolution. And this is something that happened over and over and over again, right? Like I said, they sped up the process of evolution because the fruit fly's lifespan is only a week. So for humans, we have to live 100 years, right? And you won't be able to see any type of mutation or quote unquote evolution for eons, right? Because of our long lifespan. Whereas the fruit fly, we can speed it up, right? And we put them in the conditions, which also speeds it up, because the evidence for evolution is that these conditions, if they're all met, evolution will occur. The fruit flies didn't go through evolution. They were the end result after maybe 1,000 generations of interbreeding was that they were born without hearts and they died. So that's the end result of this type of experiment. The Hardy-Weinberg principles don't lead to revolution; they lead to death. So and we've done a lot of other types of experiments. I want to get more into that in point 6. There's closing arguments. We won't call it point 6. My third point is similar genetic material between species. They use this as evidence, like I mentioned earlier with the prokaryotic, eukaryotic cells. They have the organelles look like the bacteria. Animals have legs. The human the DNA and the genetic makeup of a human is only about 4% different from that of a mouse. Yet we look nothing like the mouse. So things looking like each other doesn't prove evolution, because we don't look anything like a banana, but we have just similar genetic makeup to that, right? What that just means is that Allah created us all with similar genetic material. What evolution is our base genes. There's 4 human base genes, and they are adenine, guanine, thymine, and cytosine. Sorry, adenine, guanine, thymine, and cytosine. So those are the 4 base genes. It's kind of similar to code. If you look at the DNA, it's like A, C, T, A, and the T stands for a thymine, C stands for a cytosine, et cetera, et cetera. So those are the 4 genes that make up a human being. For us to go through an evolution, one of 2 things has to happen. One of these 4 genes has to change into a different gene that we've never seen, or maybe an animal has that we don't, or we get an additional gene that we've never seen, and instead of 4, we now have 5 genes, right? This has never happened. We've never seen it. When evolutionists point out, like, oh, there's a tribe in Africa or South America, they dived into the water to hunt animals on the bottom of the ocean floor for centuries and centuries, and because of that, they now have bigger lungs, or their stomachs are now bigger, that they can last without food for more days. That is adaptation. That is not evolution. I do believe in adaptation. I believe that people can adapt. Let's say if you have been living in some frozen tundra for like 200 years, and your skin becomes more easy to, it's harder to become drier because of that. That's adaptation. That's not evolution. So we have to differentiate between adaptation and evolution. Evolution is when those 4 genes I mentioned change into a new, completely different gene, meaning your species changes, or, an additional gene is added, and there are genetic mutations like Klinefelter syndrome, the XXXY. Humans have 23 chromosomes, right? And then for these mutations like Klinefelter syndrome, one of those 23 DNAs is one of those 23 chromosomes changes, and you get like an XXXY. But the human genes are still cytosine, thymine, adenine, and guanine. It's still a human. It's a mutation, and it's still a human. So we need to, just differentiate between adaptation and evolution. Things looking like each other is not evidence for evolution, because Allah already said in the Quran that He created all living things from water and similar genetic material, right? And I'll get more into that in my next point, which is I'm going to talk about now. It's the 4th point: Islamic evidences regarding creation. As I mentioned earlier, Allah created the first human, Adam alayhi salam, out of clay, and then brought life to it, gave it, the organs, and used water, our blood, right? And it's scientifically proven that all humans have components of clay in their skin, and the different colors do resemble clay, different types of clay, right? Different types of dirt, if you will. What was I going to say? So that's one type of evidence. The second type I wanted to mention, and this is mentioned in the Quran. Let me pull it up here. Let's see, where is it? In verse, sorry, I'm like way up here. In verses, and there's a couple verses, but I'll just mention one of them. Allah says in verse 7166, Surah Al-Araf, so when they were insolent about that which they had been forbidden, we said to them, be apes despised. So this is regarding the children of Israel. This was, around the time of the Prophet Moses alayhi salam, where they transgressed against the Sabbath, which Jews observe. Instead of observing the Sabbath, they decided to go fishing because they saw Allah tested them. He made none of the fish bite on their hooks or whatever. However they fished back then, they were not biting during every single day of the week except on the Sabbath. So He tested their faith, and they decided to ignore the Sabbath and go fishing during that time. So Allah punished them by turning them into apes, basically what you would call de-evolution. So Allah confirms in this verse that He is able to change a human into another animal. And this kind of proves that we have similar genetic material, right? And not just apes, but pigs as well. Allah is perfectly capable of changing us into anything He wants. And then after He changed these people into apes, they soon died afterwards. So the apes today are not descendants of these people. That's not what that means. Prophet ﷺ says, towards the end of time, this punishment will be brought back. Humans will, again, transform into these animals. People might take it at that time as evolution, but rather it's a punishment. It's He devolved them because they maybe they acted no better than an animal. They were aggressive, who knows, or they disregarded a lot of what Allah commanded. Their punishment is that they become an animal, lack of intelligence, and then they die soon after that. So that just wanted to bring up that. And then my last and final point is general Islamic evidence. I never go around to people and saying, hey, believe in Allah because He created all humans out of clay. No, that's a silly thing. There's a lot of Islamic prophecies that the Prophet ﷺ made, over 80 of them, and of the 80, about 40 of them have already passed. One of them, and I'll give you a couple examples, is, and because atheists always ask for evidence, right? And no prophet came without evidence. And with the prophecies that were mentioned 1,400 years ago, I would say it's easier to become a Muslim today than it was in his time period where they saw the miracles of the moon splitting and inanimate objects speaking in His presence, etc., that were recorded in the narrations. The Prophet ﷺ mentioned that the Arabian Peninsula, which is basically a desert, he mentioned that towards the end of time, it will return towards being green and meadows. just like it did before, and scientifically proven that millions of years ago, the Arabian Peninsula was green and meadows, kind of like we're seeing in the North American area, trees everywhere, meadows. It wasn't a desert. And if you look today, it is changing into that with two factors. One is if you believe in global warming or climate change, that's one. The other factor is technology, cloud seeding, for example. They're able to fertilize the desert terrain and produce vegetation. So this prophecy has come true. And this is something that no normal man could have known, right? How would he have known millions of years ago that area was like that? There was no prior record of that being known. Another evidence for Islam is fetus development. It mentions every single period of fetus development, the zygote, what happens after 40 days, what happens after 120 days, etc. And it perfectly describes fetus development with the stem and all that. And this was only proven recently. And this is proven because in the 1600s, the most popular theory about fetus development was that humans were already, their bodies were already made within the sperm before injecting it into the woman. Basically like a homunculus, basically. It's called, the theory was called preformationism, one of the two. And it was a very popular theory in Europe. A lot of people say, oh, well, Galen Merrick talked about fetus development. Well, there's not really any evidence for that. They could have just made that up after Islam mentioned it. Plus, that was far beyond the Prophet's time period. And there were a variety of different theories in that time. So the fact that this specific one, the fetus development, which was not accepted by the people, as I mentioned in the 1600s, the popular theory was preformationism. Islam, and they were using that as evidence, like, see, this is why Islam's wrong, this theory right here. And then it later became proven that the Islamic point on fetus development was the correct one. There's other evidences, such as Allah mentioning that clouds are heavy in the Quran, which was only recently proven. Before, people thought clouds were very light. There's the numerical evidences. I won't get into that. There's other prophecies. There's dozens of prophecies that are mentioned in the Quran. And he predicted exactly what would happen after his death with regards to how the companions would act and what happened there. I won't get into all the evidences. I'm not here to. This video is a response to specifically evolution and creationism. But I wanted to mention those evidences because there is evidence for Islam. But Allah says in the Quran that evidence is not enough for you to believe in him. And only those he guides will believe in him. Meaning, even if Allah rose the dead up in front of you to speak to you, sent angels in front of you to see with your own eyes, and showed you every single miracle you could ever ask for, every single evidence, you will not believe unless Allah wills it. And to believe, Allah mentions in other verses that he guides people who do good deeds, who have faith, and who avoid sins, who prefer the hereafter to this life. So there's different characteristics that you have to gain and implement into your own life in order to become a Muslim and be guided. The evidence is it increases faith and it supports faith, but you cannot become a Muslim and without those characteristics mentioned. And those Muslims who don't have those characteristics, Allah mentions he replaces them with people among the non-Muslims who exhibit those characteristics that Allah loves, and he guides those people and he misguides those Muslims and replaces the two. So don't put too much emphasis on evidence and on theories, scientific theories that contradict what Allah has revealed, because many times we have seen this before. Scientists will make up evidence to get the funding that they need. There was one such example where a group of scientists glued together the skull of an ape and a human being and presented it as evidence of evolution to continue getting funding for their research, because the funding pays for their livelihoods, right? Their house, their food, etc., etc. So we have to put less weight on theories because evolution is a theory. It's not a law. It's not proven, right? And just know that with every century that has passed by, there were theories that contradicted Islam that were later proven false. Preformationism is one of them. This is where faith comes into play. And the benefits of faith, completely different topic of discussion. But anyway, hopefully this answers the question. Feel free to respond to any of the points. I've been researching evolution for a long time. I've taken a lot of genetics classes, and I've worked in labs myself, and I understand the process of bacterial growth and evolution and all that. So anyway, feel free to ask me whatever you like. This video is already 20 minutes. I'm going to end it here. Assalamu alaikum.